Please, don't leave me. I can't move." Those were the desperate words of a 12-year-old girl lying on the forest floor, bleeding from 19 stab wounds. Her body was weak, her voice fading. She was alone. Or so it seemed, because just beyond the trees, the two people who left her to die were not strangers. They were her friends. And when police finally caught up to them, the reason they gave was even more shocking. They said, Slender Man made them do it. A quiet suburban town, tree-lined streets, kids riding bikes, families preparing for summer. It looked like the safest place in America. But behind one ordinary weekend sleepover, something unthinkable was about to unfold. This wasn't a case of stranger danger. It was a betrayal. A friend turned predator. All under the shadow of a monster that doesn't even exist, Slender Man. And before this story ends, you'll see how the lines between childhood games and deadly obsession blurred in a way that shocked an entire nation. Payton Leutner was 12 years old, but everyone called her Bella. She had an easy smile, the kind that made people feel welcome. Teachers remembered her as respectful, kind, and bright. Friends described her as funny, a little shy at first, but once she warmed up, she could light up an entire room. She loved playing with her dog, drawing little doodles in her notebooks, and spending time with the girls she called her best friends. In many ways, Bella was like any other child her age. She had sleepovers with her classmates, giggled at silly games, and whispered secrets late into the night. She was at that age where the world still felt magical, full of trust, where friends meant everything. Two of those friends were Morgan, Geyser and Anissa Weier. They were the same age as Bella, 12 years old, and the three of them seemed inseparable. Morgan had been Bella's friend since the 4th grade. Anissa joined them later, after moving into the area. To their parents, it was comforting to see the girls together. They thought their children had found good company. Together, they did the things middle school girls do. They had birthday parties, shared inside jokes, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. They sat side by side in the cafeteria, whispered secrets during recess, and talked about crushes and cartoons. They played games, passed notes in class, and dreamed about what they wanted to be when they grew up. To anyone watching, their friendship looked innocent, even sweet. But under the surface, something darker was beginning to take shape. Morgan, unlike Bella, had always been a little different. She was smart, creative, and imaginative, but her imagination often wandered into darker places. She could be quiet one moment, then strangely intense the next. Her notebooks weren't filled with doodles of hearts and flowers. Instead, they contained drawings of tall, faceless figures her parents didn't fully understand. Anissa, too, seemed drawn to the same stories. When she met Morgan, she found someone who shared her fascination with the strange and the unsettling. Together, they discovered a corner of the internet that most children their age had never seen. That was where they met their new friend, not a classmate, not a neighbor, not a real person at all. He lived in online forums and creepy stories and blurry photographs and whispered myths. A towering man with no face dressed in black who was said to haunt the shadows. They called him Slender Man. At first, it might have seemed like a game, like telling ghost stories at a campfire. But for Morgan and Anissa, it wasn't just fun. It wasn't pretend. They believed he was watching them. They believed he was real. And to them, he wasn't just a story. He was a master, a protector, a threat. They whispered about him at school, shared links on their computers, and convinced each other that Slender Man demanded something from them, something terrible. Bella, though, didn't share their belief. For her, it was just another internet story, something to laugh about and move on from. She had no idea how deeply her friends had fallen into this obsession. No one did. But in time, that obsession would take on a life of its own, and soon Bella would pay the price for it. Slender Man was not born in the real world. He was created on the internet, inside an online forum called Something Awful. In 2009, users were challenged to post creepy edited images. One of those images showed a tall, faceless figure standing in the background of old black and white photos. He was given a name, Slender Man. The idea spread quickly. People added their own stories, their own drawings, their own sightings. He became part of what is called creepypasta, short horror tales shared online, copied and pasted across forums. In these stories, Slender Man haunted children, lured them into the woods, and punished anyone who disobeyed him. For most people, it was just a story, a piece of internet folklore. But to Morgan and Anissa, it became something else. They didn't just read about him. They studied him. They stayed up late scrolling through page after page of fan sites, forums, and YouTube videos filled with warnings and myths. They whispered about him at school. They carried him in their conversations like he was a real person. They believed that Slender Man lived in a mansion deep in the forest. They thought if they served him, he would protect them. But if they disobeyed him, he would hurt their families. So they began to plan, quietly, secretly, like two children preparing for a test no one else knew about. They drew pictures of him. They wrote about him in their notebooks. They even discussed rituals, ways to prove their loyalty to him. The obsession grew stronger each day. Slender Man was no longer a story. They treated him like a master, someone who controlled their choices. And when they asked themselves how to show their devotion, the answer they gave was horrifying. They believed they had to kill. They didn't look for a stranger. They didn't choose someone random. Their chosen target was their own best friend. It was May 31st, 2014. The first day of summer break in Waukesha, Wisconsin. For Payton, it felt like the perfect start to vacation. She had been invited to a sleepover at Morgan's house. Just another weekend with friends. The night before, the girls ate pizza, played with dolls, and stayed up late watching movies. They laughed, whispered secrets, and did the ordinary things 12-year-old girls do. To Payton, it was normal, safe. But for Morgan and Anissa, the sleepover wasn't about fun. It was about setting the stage for what they believed they had to do. Hidden inside Morgan's bedroom was a kitchen knife, nearly 5 inches long. She had slipped it into her backpack before the sleepover began. A weapon, waiting in the shadows, while her parents believed their daughter was simply hosting a friend. The next morning, the girls ate breakfast, put on their clothes, and asked for permission to go outside. No one suspected a thing. They left the house laughing, the way children always do. To anyone passing by, they looked like 3 friends enjoying the start of summer. They walked to the local roller rink, skated for a while, and later made their way to a nearby park. The sun was shining. Children played on swings. Families walked their dogs. No one could have guessed that a knife was tucked away and that 2 of those girls were preparing to attack the other. At first, they tried in the bathroom of the skating rink, but the timing didn't feel right. Too many people, too much noise. They needed privacy, so they waited. Eventually, they led Payton toward a wooded area near the park. It was quiet, hidden from view. The trees cast long shadows, blocking the light. To Payton, it was just another part of the adventure. To Morgan and Anissa, it was the place they had chosen to do the unthinkable. When they reached the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter faded. Words became whispers. Anissa suggested a game of hide-and-seek, a way to lure Payton deeper into the trees. Trusting her friends, Payton followed. And then it happened. Morgan pulled out the knife. Small hands gripping cold steel. She pushed Payton down. The blade pierced flesh once, twice, again and again. 19 times in total. Each strike delivered by a child. Each wound carved into the body of someone they called their best friend. As Payton lay there, blood soaking into the ground, she whispered words that cut deeper than any blade. "I trusted you." Those 3 words captured everything. The shock, the betrayal, the disbelief that her friends, her closest companions, had turned against her. And then they walked away, left her in the dirt to die, believing they had completed their mission for Slender Man. But Payton wasn't finished. Somehow she began to crawl. Her body broken, her breath shallow, but her will to live stronger than the pain. Payton was alone in the woods. Her clothes were torn, her body pierced by 19 stab wounds. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the dirt and leaves. Every breath was shallow. Every movement sent a shock of pain through her body. Most children her age would have given up, but Payton refused. Using what little strength she had left, she pressed one hand into the ground and began to crawl. Inch by inch, she dragged herself forward. Branches cut her skin. Stones dug into her palms. Her vision blurred, but she kept moving. She whispered to herself, soft, broken words, Keep going. Someone will help. Don't stop." Her body trembled, but her will to live was stronger than the knife wounds in her chest, arms, and abdomen. Step by step, breath by breath, she pulled herself toward the sound of a road. And then, fate intervened. A man on a bicycle came down the path. He wasn't looking for a child. He was simply out for a ride, enjoying the start of summer. But what he saw stopped him cold. There in the grass was a little girl, pale, shaking, covered in blood. Payton looked up at him and whispered, "Please help me." The cyclist immediately called 911. His voice shook as he told dispatchers what he found. A 12-year-old girl stabbed, fighting for her life. Within minutes, police and paramedics rushed to the scene. They lifted Payton onto a stretcher, her small frame barely able to hold on. Sirens wailed as they sped her to the hospital, racing against the clock to keep her alive. Meanwhile, police spread through the area, searching for the attackers. What they found was stranger than anyone could have imagined. Morgan and Anissa were not hiding. They weren't running. They were walking calmly along a highway several miles from the park. Their destination? They told officers they were on their way to Slender Man's mansion, a place they believed existed deep in the Nicolet National Forest, more than 200 miles away. They carried no map, no food, just the belief that after the stabbing, Slender Man would welcome them into his home. Officers stood stunned. Two 12-year-olds, blood on their clothes, speaking about a monster from the internet as though he were real. And back in the hospital, their victim was fighting to stay alive. 12-year-olds, a fantasy mansion, a real victim. And as investigators began to piece together the truth, one question echoed louder than all the rest. What would the court do with children who claimed a monster told them to kill? Inside the police station, investigators sat across from two 12-year-old girls. Their clothes were stained with blood, their voices steady, their faces calm. What came next left seasoned detectives in disbelief. On camera, Morgan and Anissa began to talk. Not with fear, not with guilt, but with certainty. They explained how Slender Man had watched them for years, how he lived in a mansion hidden deep in the forest, how, if they didn't kill for him, he would come after them. To them, it wasn't a fantasy, it was reality. They spoke about him the way most children speak about a parent, or a teacher, or a neighbor, as if he was someone who truly existed, someone who held power over their lives. Morgan, in particular, spoke without hesitation. She described how the plan had been forming for months, how she believed the stabbing was necessary. Her eyes were distant, her voice never wavered. But as the investigation deepened, doctors discovered something more. Morgan was suffering from early-onset schizophrenia, a rare and devastating mental illness, especially in someone so young. She had hallucinations. She heard voices. She saw things no one else could see. Her mind blurred the line between reality and imagination. To her, Slender Man was not just an idea. He was a figure she believed in, with the same conviction that others believe in the sun rising each morning. Anissa's role was different. She didn't suffer from hallucinations, but she became consumed by the same myth. She immersed herself in stories, fed on internet forums, and convinced herself that if she didn't help Morgan, Slender Man would punish them both. Her obsession wasn't born from madness, but from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being left behind, fear of a monster that didn't exist. When the case went to court, the debate was fierce. Were these girls cold-blooded, killers who made a choice, or were they children lost in the grip of delusion and mental illness? Prosecutors argued that Payton's suffering demanded justice, that choices had been made, and consequences must follow. Defense attorneys countered with Morgan's diagnosis, with her inability to separate fantasy from reality. They spoke of Anissa's vulnerability, how easily she was pulled into the spiral. Jurors and judges faced a haunting question: how do you punish children who claim a monster made them kill? In the end, the verdicts reflected the complexity of the case. Morgan was ordered to spend up to 40 years in a mental health institution. Not a prison, but a hospital, a place where doctors could monitor her, treat her, and decide if she would ever be safe enough to rejoin society. Anissa was sentenced to 25 years in a psychiatric facility. Her role was different, but still devastating. The court believed she too needed years of treatment before she could be trusted to walk free. Slender Man wasn't real, but the danger was. Subscribe now or comment below. Why ignore stories that remind us what's real and what's deadly? Against all odds, Payton survived. Doctors later said it was a miracle. 19 stab wounds, some missing her major arteries by the width of a human hair. If even one cut had gone deeper, she might not have made it. She underwent countless surgeries, tubes, stitches, long hospital nights. Her young body endured more than most adults ever could. Each operation stitched her back together physically, but the emotional scars ran far deeper. Her family never forgot the moment they saw her in the hospital bed, pale but breathing. The heartbreak of knowing their daughter had been betrayed. The pride of knowing she had fought hard enough to live. For Payton, healing wasn't only about her body. It meant facing fear each time she closed her eyes at night. It meant remembering the woods, the pain, and the faces of the 2 girls she once trusted. And for her parents, it meant grappling with questions no family wants to ask. How do you protect a child from something that starts on the internet? How do you see warning signs when they hide behind screens and whispers? The Slender Man stabbing wasn't only about one victim, 2 attackers, and a myth. It became a mirror for society. It showed how fragile the line is between story and reality, between mental illness and violence, between childhood innocence and unthinkable harm. Parents across America suddenly looked at their children's screens differently. They wondered what stories were being read, what games were being played, what voices were shaping young minds. And for experts, the case raised deeper concerns about schizophrenia in children, about how early delusions can take hold, about the power of isolation, obsession, and fear. In the end, this wasn't about a monster from the woods. It wasn't about a faceless figure with long arms and no eyes. It was about 2 children, and a story they let consume them. This lands heavy, somber, and reflective, carrying the audience to the final closing act with emotional weight. In the screen, a photo of Payton appears. She's smiling, her eyes bright, her hair brushed neatly over her shoulders, a reminder she was only 12 years old. 12, an age when life should be about school projects, birthday parties, and learning who you are. Not about surviving 19 stab wounds, not about betrayal at the hands of friends. As the photo lingers, the story comes full circle. They said Slender Man made them do it, but the truth is harsher. 2 little girls, driven by fear, delusion, and obsession, almost erased their best friend. They nearly ended a life before it had even begun. And in doing so, they changed the way America sees the internet forever. Parents began to question what their children were reading online. Teachers wondered what influences slipped through their classrooms. A nation realized that even myths, when believed deeply enough, can kill. Payton's survival is proof of her strength, but it is also a reminder of how close she came to being just another headline. If you don't subscribe, her survival and her pain are forgotten. Subscribe now, and for those who still won't, then let me ask, why? If you won't subscribe, at least say why in the comments. Why her story didn't deserve your voice. Why her name should fade.